Pearl Harbor, the attack America never saw coming. At 7:48 in the morning on December 7, 1941, the first bomb fell on a sleeping American naval base in Hawaii. Within 2 hours, nearly the entire United States Pacific Fleet lay burning or sunk. Over 2,400 Americans were dead, and a nation that had spent years insisting it would stay out of the war raging across Europe and Asia found itself thrust into the single most devastating military conflict in human history. What almost nobody in Washington saw coming had, in reality, been building for months, hidden in plain sight, buried under assumptions nobody wanted to question until it was far too late. Throughout 1941, tensions between the United States and Japan had been escalating steadily, driven largely by Japan's ongoing military expansion across China and Southeast Asia, which the United States had responded to with increasingly severe economic sanctions, including a devastating oil embargo that threatened to cripple Japan's entire military and industrial capacity within months. Japanese military leadership, faced with the choice between withdrawing from their conquered territories or finding a way to secure the resources they desperately needed elsewhere, made a calculated, extraordinarily high-risk decision: launch a devastating preemptive strike against the American Pacific Fleet, crippling US naval power in the Pacific before formal war was even declared, buying Japan enough time to seize resource-rich territories across Southeast Asia before America could effectively respond. The plan, developed under the direction of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet, was audacious in scope and required a level of secrecy and precision Japan had never previously attempted. A strike force of 6 aircraft carriers, along with dozens of supporting vessels, would need to cross over 3,000 miles of open Pacific Ocean entirely undetected, maintaining strict radio silence for the better part of 2 weeks while American intelligence services, monitoring Japanese naval movements and diplomatic communications, remained convinced any Japanese attack would target locations far closer to Japan itself, such as the Philippines or British territories in Southeast Asia, rather than an attack across such enormous distances against Hawaii directly. What made the eventual attack so devastating wasn't simply Japanese military planning, but a series of critical intelligence failures and dismissed warnings on the American side that, viewed in hindsight, painted an unmistakable picture nobody had assembled in time. American codebreakers had successfully intercepted and decrypted significant portions of Japanese diplomatic communications in the months leading up to the attack, revealing clear indications that a major military action was imminent, though the specific target and exact timing remained genuinely unclear from the intercepted communications alone. Radar operators at a station on Oahu actually detected the incoming Japanese aircraft nearly an hour before the attack began, but their report was dismissed by a duty officer who assumed the readings represented an expected flight of American B-17 bombers arriving from the mainland that same morning, a fatal misjudgment that eliminated what could have been a critical final warning. At 7:48 that Sunday morning, when most of the base's personnel were still asleep or beginning their weekend routines, the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor with devastating, coordinated precision. Dive bombers and torpedo planes targeted the American battleships moored along what became known as Battleship Row, while fighter aircraft strafed airfields across the island, destroying American planes before they could even take off to mount any meaningful defense. The USS Arizona suffered the single most devastating loss of the entire attack when a bomb penetrated directly into its forward ammunition magazine, triggering a catastrophic explosion that killed 1,177 crew members in a matter of seconds, nearly half of all American deaths that day, and sank the battleship so quickly that many of the men aboard never had any realistic chance of escape. By the time the second wave of Japanese aircraft completed their assault roughly 2 hours after the attack began, 4 American battleships had been sunk, 4 more severely damaged, and nearly 200 aircraft destroyed, alongside the deaths of 2,403 Americans and injuries, to over 1,100 more, representing one of the most devastating single-day military losses in American history up to that point. What Japanese military planners hadn't fully accounted for, and what would ultimately prove catastrophically significant to the war's eventual outcome, was that America's Pacific aircraft carriers, arguably the most strategically valuable vessels in the entire fleet, happened to be away from Pearl Harbor on training exercises and deployment missions at the exact moment of the attack, meaning they survived completely unscathed, a fortunate absence that would prove decisively important within just 6 months, when those same surviving carriers played the pivotal role in America's crucial victory at the Battle of Midway, a battle historians widely consider the turning point of the entire Pacific War. The attack on Pearl Harbor achieved precisely the opposite of what Japanese military leadership had actually hoped to accomplish. Rather than crippling American resolve and buying Japan time to consolidate its territorial gains before America could mount an effective response, the sheer scale and audacity of the surprise attack, conducted without a formal declaration of war and against what many Americans had previously assumed was an unreachable, secure military installation, produced a wave of national outrage and unified public support for war that transformed American public opinion virtually overnight. President Franklin Roosevelt's address to Congress the following day, declaring December 7th a date that would live in infamy, received a formal declaration of war against Japan within hours, and Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, subsequently declared war on the United States as well, drawing America fully and irreversibly into the global conflict Japanese leadership had specifically hoped to delay engaging until more favorable conditions had been established. Admiral Yamamoto himself, according to historical accounts, had expressed private reservations about the ultimate wisdom of the attack even as he planned it, reportedly warning Japanese leadership that the strike might succeed brilliantly in the short term while awakening an industrial and military giant whose full mobilized power Japan would ultimately prove unable to match over the course of a prolonged war. A prediction that would prove devastatingly accurate over the following 4 years, as American industrial capacity and military production eventually overwhelmed Japan's initial advantages entirely. Nearly 2,400 Americans died within roughly 2 hours on a quiet Sunday morning in an attack most of the country had been repeatedly reassured could never realistically happen, executed by a military planning team who had gambled everything on a devastating tactical victory, only to trigger precisely the full-scale American mobilization and eventual total defeat of Japan that the attack had been specifically designed to prevent. If stories like this, where the very attack meant to secure victory instead guaranteed eventual defeat, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.